Hello, and welcome to Modern 101. Today's video is meant for people getting ready to dip their toes into Modern now that we have a Modern RCQ season coming up. I know and see a lot of people kind of not thrilled when Modern gets announced as a season simply because they are not familiar with the format, not practiced in the format, and especially with the price of a lot of decks, they are not excited about investing in this complex format that they've never played before. Uh, but Modern is very cool. It's very diverse, and there's a lot of different ways to play. There's a lot of powerful strategies, and for a long time, Modern was my least favorite format, and sometimes an RCQ season that I skipped. Um, but nowadays, it's my favorite format, and it has been for a while. And so, my goal today is to talk about the meta decks and how they work, some of the key cards and key interactions, and also cover kind of the cards that make modern modern and the interactions that make modern modern. Um, as you probably know, I am an aggro player and typically a prowess player, so um, we're going to start with Izzet Prowess, and playing that deck is the lens through which I see all the other decks in the format, but um, I will be as I'll be covering how I see opposing decks as a prowess player, but also, um, from angles that other players or archetypes may see the deck. So this is not a how to win with prowess video, although all of my videos could be categorized as that in some way, shape, or form. But this is like a what the heck is modern video, and how do I not be intimidated by all the very powerful things going on in the format. Um, so, with that said, we will start with Izzet Prowess, and then I'll go in order of the meta. But starting with Izzet Prowess, the first thing that I want to look at as I introduce you to Modern is the mana base. Because Modern has these things called fetch lands. And fetch lands are incredibly powerful cards. And they enable you to be super, super consistent with your 2 color and even 3 color decks. We'll see later there's a 5 color deck in the format. But fetch lands let you pay a life and go get any mountain or any, in this case, plains. Each fetch land is 2 colors, and there's fetch lands for every color pair. And you get to put it on the battlefield, tapped, untapped, up to you. So with Arid Mesa, Bloodstained Mire, and Scalding Tarn, we have 10 fetch lands in the stock prowess deck. And all 10 of those fetch lands name mountain in the lands that they can fetch, which means they can fetch good old fashioned basic mountain, but they can also fetch Steam Vents, which has the land type of Island Mountain. And so I can use my fetch land to go get a Steam Vents. And when I go to put my Steam Vents in play, I can pay 2 life and put Steam Vents into play untapped. And so the way that that ends up working out is, aside from my 3 Steam Vents that are in the deck, I have 10 fetch lands that can go grab Steam Vents. So effectively, I have 13 copies of Steam Vents, which means if I want to, I can start every game with my blue red land. And that goes for, basically every color pair. And so the mana in Modern is very, very good because fetch lands are so powerful at enabling you to consistently have your colors. What you'll also see in every deck, even Prowess, the fastest aggro deck in the format, the deck that it's not the fastest deck in the format, but it's the fastest aggro deck in the format, still plays a Surveil land, a land that always enters tapped. That's because if you notice on the type line, Surveil lands also have basic land types. They have Island Mountain on this Thundering Falls, which means my fetch lands can get my Surveil land, which is a free Surveil. Looking at the top card of your deck and deciding, do I want to draw this or do I want to get rid of this, is a very, very powerful thing. And as we'll see as we look at more modern decks, many of these decks can utilize cards when they're in the graveyard. So surveilling a card into the graveyard is extra powerful in this case. And no matter what deck you're playing, you would be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised, how frequently you're okay with playing a fetch land or playing a tap land. Even with prowess, as early as turn one, you may want to surveil. The second deck that we're going to look at today is Boros Energy. And Boros Energy plays a lot of very powerful 1-mana creatures. And so as a prowess player, there's a chance that you might just play your fetch land and pass the turn in anticipation of using one of your removal spells to kill your opponent's 1-mana creature. Let's say your opponent plays a fetch land and passes back to you. They didn't play one of those powerful 1-mana creatures. Now, in Pioneer or Standard, you would have shocked in Steam Vents, pass the turn, and then when your opponent does nothing, you're like, oh man, I wasted my life, I wasted my turn, I wasted my land drop, I didn't do anything, right? But what's fantastic in Modern is now my opponent didn't do anything. I say, okay, fine. I'll go fetch Thundering Falls. And now I have, for only 1 life instead of 2 or 3 life, I have a dual land in play. And I get to surveil. So I didn't waste my turn cycle. I got to look at the top card of my deck. And if it's a good card, I keep it. If it's a card that I want in the graveyard, then I throw it away. And if it's a bad card, I throw it away. And it's almost like I drew a card. These fetch lands making mana so good and making the surveil land so good is a key pillar of Modern. And you might be thinking, wow, that's probably really taxing on your life total. And on the one hand it is, and that's one of the things that allows a deck like Prowess to be good, and at times a deck like Burn to be good, because many players are playing decks that deal a lot of damage to themselves. However, on the other side of that coin, decks are really powerful and resilient and play offense and defense very well, and so the the power you get from playing all these fetch lands is far greater than the life that you give up along the way. We'll even see sometimes your opponent basically starts the game at 15 because you're playing against a black 2-color deck, and they fetch, that's 1 life, shock, that's 2 more life, and then cast Thoughtseize on turn 1, that's 2 more life. They spend 5 life on turn 1. But it's hard to really convince you. Maybe it's just you got to trust me, but it really is, generally very, very worth it. And it's one of the things that I love about the format, because you spend a lot less games losing because your deck didn't do anything, because you didn't have the right colors, you didn't have enough lands, the extra looks, the perfect colors. We have very, very powerful mana bases in Modern. Now, on to Izzet Prowess and how it works. And so it is a classic red aggro deck. The best card in the deck, of course, is Kori Steelcutter. Unless you've been living under a rock for, the last however long it's been since Tarkir Dragonstorm came out, you know what Kori Steelcutter does. You know how powerful it is. The key interaction here is that Izzet Prowess gets to play Mishra's Bauble, Notice that little 0 up in the top right corner? Mishra's Bauble costs 0 mana. And we also get to play Mutagenic Growth. And if you're not familiar, that little symbol in the top right is a Phyrexian mana, which means instead of paying green mana to cast Mutagenic Growth, which you'll notice this deck has none of, you can simply pay 2 life in order to cast Mutagenic Growth. And that brings us to our kind of next pillar of Modern, and that would be free spells. If you've only played Standard or Pioneer up until this point, then you have not played with free spells. And this completely changes the game, especially as an aggro player and probably as a player of any archetype. Typically, we're used to, all right, my opponent tapped their 3 lands. They have no untapped mana, which means they can't do anything interesting. They can't do anything of consequence. I'm free to kind of solve this lethal puzzle or solve this puzzle to generate value or get ahead, and I don't need to worry about what my opponent's doing. But that is not the case in Modern. It's extremely important to be familiar with the popular cards in your opponent's deck that cost 0 mana, because there's no way to know when it's coming, besides all those different like soft skills of reading your opponent's hand. But it's not like Standard where you go, okay, my opponent has 1 red mana up. That means they can't cast Bounce Off right now because they don't have blue mana. They can only cast Shock because they have red mana. If I have no mana, I can still cast Mutagenic Growth, which is a way to beat red-based removal like Lightning Bolt or Lava Dart that we see here in the Prowess deck. And so back to Corey Steelcutter, in Standard, Steelcutter was very, very powerful because as early as turn 3, you were generating value. And one of the only kind of weak points is that sometimes you just had to play a cutter on turn 2. And if your opponent has an answer to your cutter on turn 2, that's the one case where you didn't get any value, right? But in Modern, now we have cutter plus Mishra's Bauble, and boom, I've already made a Prowess creature on turn 2, which Cutter Bauble is just one of the most powerful starts in the format. It really sets you up very strongly to kill your opponent, sometimes on turn 3 and definitely on turn 4 if they do not have an answer. And if you're playing Mutagenic Growth in your deck, Mutagenic Growth does require a target. So in this case, I need to have played Dragon's Rage Channeler or Monastery Swiftspear on turn 1, and I need that creature to have survived the turn cycle. But if that happens, I have 4 more cards that can potentially trigger my Corey Steelcutter on turn 2 to get the party started very early. And that is the goal of Stock Prowess, is to put these really efficient, powerful creatures in play, put Steelcutter in play, and fire off a flurry of spells to kill your opponent as quickly as possible. We have the 4 Mishra's Bauble, the 4 Mutagenic Growth, as 8 freeze spells. But the really cool part, one of my favorite cards in the format, maybe my favorite card in the format, is that Lava Dart has a flashback cost to sacrifice a mountain, and you get to recast it. So you're not spending any mana, you're just sacrificing a mountain, which is just so cool. There's something special to me about sacrificing a mountain. But again, since it's in your graveyard, this free spell is kind of face up, but it's still hidden in a sense that, let's say your Prowess opponent attacks with 3 creatures and has 1 mana available. You might think, okay, they're attacking for, let's say 6, and they cast a spell. Now they're attacking for 9, right? But imagine that spell is Lava Dart. Lava Dart is actually 2 spells. So 6 became 9, became 12, plus the 2 damage from Lava Dart. And heaven forbid they also have a Mutagenic Growth. What looked like, okay, my opponent has 1 mana, they can cast 1 spell. Now they've cast 3 spells. Um, so the deck can really deal a lot of damage from a seemingly uh, not too scary position. And so that's the general plan A, is to play your creatures as fast as possible and kill your opponent as fast as possible. The really nice thing is that Prowess also gets to play Preordain, an exceedingly powerful cantrip. You get to scry 2, then draw a card, and Expressive Iteration, which in a lot of ways is a 2-mana draw 2 with selection. Typically, the Prowess player is going to get 2 cards off of their 2-mana Expressive Iteration. And Violent Urge is a card that in Standard you really have to build around Delirium in order to have a chance to get Delirium. But with fetch lands, you pretty much always have a land in your graveyard. So Delirium is a thing that's much easier to achieve as a sub goal in Modern, and so Violent Urge is a very playable and enableable card without playing a full-on Delirium build. And you'll see in the sideboard Unholy Heat, which is also a Delirium card in many decks, not just Prowess. So I promised this wouldn't be a Prowess video. I'm going to kind of stop there and just summarize that Prowess is efficient creatures, efficient spells, free spells, tries to kill you on turn 3 if you aren't interacting, can very consistently kill you on turn 4, and Cutter Bobble is definitely the key interaction here, where you are starting the Courtney Steel Cutter party right on turn 2. I personally am playing an offshoot variant of Prowess, which you may or may not have seen me talk about. It's not a big part of the meta. I'm not going to do a deck tech here. But the long story short is it takes some of these less flexible cards like Slickshot and Mutagenic Growth, which either kill your opponent or do nothing, and it replaces them with interaction. Because, as is in Standard, blue-red is a really powerful color pair. There's a lot of strong things you can do with it. Anyway, I already talked more about Prowess than I set out to, so let's talk about the next deck. Boros Energy, most popular deck in the format, has been since Modern Horizons 3 came out and will probably continue to be for quite some time. You'll notice that it has a very large meta percentage at 17%. And it's not like an unhealthy meta percentage, but compared to, we quickly tick down to 8%, and the rest we have like 5, 5, 5, 5, 3.9. Like, the reality is, when you play Modern locally, you never really know what you're going to see. Like, of the non-energy decks, you could see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Like, of these 13 decks, you could see any of these decks locally. And if I keep scrolling, you could... It's very reasonable that you could see Esper Blink, Crixus Reanimator, Belcher, Mill. Like, there are tons of decks that you could potentially see locally. Equally so, you might not see them. They're just like, there's so many ways to play that you may or may not see any of a ton of decks. It's one of the things that makes the format intimidating and maybe why you're here, right? But Boros Energy will be there. Every LGS is going to have at least one Boros Energy player. It's like the one truth of Modern. Boros Energy is that deck. It's powerful. It's relatively simple. It's that deck. Prowess is probably number 2 when it comes to like paper or local play. It's pretty cheap and straightforward. You'll notice that like energy is $842 estimated. Prowess is less than half of that, and so Prowess has a similar reputation of being relatively simple and relatively powerful, but for half the price. It is the entry deck for a lot of people. Sorry, you can't see that the estimate here is 389. So, Boros Energy. I'll spend a decent amount of time on this too, since it's such an important deck and one of the few decks you're really guaranteed to see. But from there on, I'll try to be more efficient so we can cover as many decks as possible. So again, we'll quickly look at the mana base and see that it is utilizing a lot of fetch lands. And one of the key lands here is Arena of Glory, which if you tap another red source and Arena, you can exert Arena of Glory, so it won't untap on the next turn. When this happens, there's usually not a next turn. And you add double red to your mana pool, and that creature gains haste until the end of turn. It's just haste, right? How bad could it be? It could be pretty bad. So, Flage has an escape cost, meaning you cast it from the graveyard. If you cast Flage from your hand, he just dies. He deals 3 damage to something, you gain 3 life, and he goes to the graveyard. Not that big of a deal. Powerful, but not that big of a deal. The big deal is that if Flage is in my graveyard, either because I cast him, or because I discarded him to something like Seasoned Pyromancer, or maybe I surveilled him with my Elegant Parlor, there's a lot of ways for Flage to get in my graveyard. His escape cost is red, red, white, white, which means our super key interaction here is when the energy deck gets to exert Arena of Glory and escape Flage. This means their 6/6 enters. They deal 3 damage to anything and gain 3 life. Maybe they're killing a blocker, maybe they're killing you. Then my 6/6 gets to attack right away. And when Flage attacks, it deals 3 damage to another target and gains another 3 life. So maybe we're killing another blocker, or maybe we're going face. And then it's a freaking 6/6. So we're talking about 12 damage coming from the graveyard, plus 6 life gained. So Flage represents an 18-point life swing when he comes rumbling out of the graveyard with Arena of Glory. So unsurprisingly, this is probably the most important interaction in the deck. For basically anyone playing against energy, even though Flage is the only card that cares about the graveyard, you're almost always going to bring in graveyard hate because Flage is the most important card in the deck. Definitely as a prowess player, when I'm playing an aggro deck, I can't afford to let my opponent deal that much damage. Their kill 2 creatures, gain 6 life with 1 card. Like, no, that's insane. I will say the one upside is that it's so absurdly powerful that your opponent, if they have the opportunity, they are almost always going to do this. If they have a chance, they're going to do it. And that's something you can take advantage of by maybe setting up a kill that you can do once they're tapped out after they complete this Flage combo. Because you'll notice, or I'll just tell you, like, energy is not playing any free spells. So unlike prowess, when I'm playing against energy, if they don't have mana, I'm good to go. Like, the light is green, I'm saying go. So if I'm not dead to Flage's 12 damage, then I can potentially kill my opponent now that they've gone shields down, even after they've gained 6 life. If I have a plotted slick shot, that can very easily add up to enough damage to kill my opponent. So it is a card to fear. It's a card that we are, teching against main deck and sideboard. But if you can't stop Flage, it doesn't mean you need to full on panic. You need to be, calculated and paying attention to, does my opponent have 5 other cards in their graveyard? Can they pay the full escape cost? And if they can, what can I do to set myself up so that after they escape Flage, with or without Arena, I can crack back in the most efficient and powerful way possible? Or maybe you're a deck that plays bounce spells or counter spells, and you just see that telegraphed Flage coming, and you want to hold up your important interaction to stop Flage from ruining your life. Now, what else is going on in the deck? This deck has 12 1-mana creatures. Notably, that's even more than the Prowess deck we saw. So this deck is very good at starting the game on turn 1. And these 1-drops are strong. Guide of Souls gains life, accumulates energy, and allows you to grow your creatures. All of this is really nightmarish for an aggro deck. It's not the scariest thing for, black-based decks playing Fatal Push or combo decks that are going to just go over the top. But certainly aggro decks don't like any of the things happening here. I don't want my opponent gaining life, and I don't want them accumulating energy, which allows them to make their creatures bigger, and it also enables Galvanic Discharge, which for 1 red mana can deal at least 3 damage. But if you have banked energy, it can deal more, making Galvanic Discharge end up being a really, really efficient damage-based removal spell. The next 1-mana creature, and this is scary for everyone, there's again a life gain theme, where we have Ocelot Pride, which is a 1/1 first strike lifelink, and it says at the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, it doesn't matter how you gained life. So if you played Ocelot Pride after playing Guide of Souls, you gained life. So if you make it to the end step, this ability will trigger. Ocelot Pride didn't have to attack. I gained life from Guide of Souls. Or maybe I gained life from Flage. Either way, I gained life. Maybe I gained life from Ocelot Pride attacking. It has first strike, so it's a pretty good attacker. If you gained life this turn, create a 1/1 cat. Then if you have the City's Blessing, for each token you control that entered the battlefield this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. So first of all, again, this energy deck is a deck of mini combos. So Guide Pride is a mini combo. I play Guide of Souls on turn 1. My opponent doesn't kill him, so now when I play Ocelot Pride on turn 2, I gain a life when Ocelot Pride enters. And then on my end step, I make another cat, which means I gain another life, and I gain another energy. Because Guide of Souls doesn't care if I cast a creature, it just cares if it entered. And now, if I have the City's Blessing, that means I have 10 permanents in play at some point. Once you gain the City's Blessing, you can't lose it. So if you play a land and it's your 10th permanent, now you have the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. It doesn't matter if your opponent, kills one of your creatures and now you have 9 permanents, you still have the City's Blessing. Now you get a copy of any token that entered this turn. Every token, including the 1/1 cat you made. So the simple extrapolation here is that once you have the City's Blessing, you make 2 cats instead of 1 cat. Okay. But what if you have 2 Ocelot Prides? So now it goes to the end step. I make a cat. Then I have the City's Blessing, so I make another cat. Then my second Ocelot Pride triggers, and I make a cat. And then, because I have the City's Blessing is going to go, oh, you made 1, 2, 3 cats already. So here's 3 more cats. As you can imagine, this starts to creep up really quickly. Why do I feel like I'm doing that math wrong? It's been a while since I've like allowed an energy player to do this. As a prowess player, I have a lot of removal for Ocelot Pride. It dies to Lava Dart. Go to end step, make a cat. City's Blessing, make another cat. Second Ocelot Pride triggers, make a cat. City's Blessing, make 1, 2, 3 cats. All right, I'm going with 6. Uh, if there's something, I don't know. I have this weird feeling that I'm forgetting something, but I digress. Um, Also, quick note on price: like this deck is almost $1,000, so you can see why people choose Prowess over it when they join. Um, but it looks at all tokens made this turn, not just cat tokens. So, for example, if you connected on an attack with Ragavan, Ragavan makes a treasure. If you did that this turn, then Ocelot Pride's going to make a treasure. A Johnny enters, makes a 2/1 cat token. If you did that this turn, you get another one. And then Fable of the Mirror Breaker is frequently played in energy. And so if you made a Goblin Shaman, now you get another one. If you made a treasure from a Goblin Shaman, now you get another one. All the tokens that this deck makes, which it makes a lot, are copied by the City's Blessing. So this ability gets quite out of hand quite quickly. So while I suspect some decks aren't all that intimidated by Guide of Souls, every deck is worried about Ocelot Pride. And as an aggro player, I hate them both. The last one drop is Ragavan, which is just generically powerful dude. 2/1. If he deals damage to your opponent, exile the top card and make a treasure. So if you're playing against Ragavan, you gotta kill it. It's similar to Ocelot Pride. You just can't let it snowball out of control. Your opponent stealing and potentially casting via that treasure, some of your best cards is just not something that you really want to deal with. I do think there are some decks that don't care as much, but for most decks, Ragavan is you gotta kill that dude. And the cool thing is that Ragavan has dash, which means if your opponent pays 2 mana instead of 1, Ragavan has haste, and that's cool, right? The upside is that Ragavan then goes back to their hand at the end of turn, but sometimes that's a downside because it means sorcery speed removal can't touch him. So again, I feel clock pressure here. I don't want to spend too much more time, but a Johnny is the last very scary card that I'll talk about. The one that's really important to interact with correctly. I guess I'll need to talk about Goblin Bombardment as well. But a Johnny is a 1/2. He creates a 2/1 cat, and if any cat dies under your control, a Johnny transforms into a Planeswalker. Ocelot Pride is also a cat, so you have this cat token that you make, plus Ocelot Pride, as creatures that now your opponent can't really kill until they deal with a Johnny. Otherwise, the Johnny is now a Planeswalker, and without going too deep into it, he's really powerful. He'll take over the game. He will kill you. So you really don't want to let a Johnny flip. One important thing, and one of the most efficient ways that energy players flip a Johnny, is with this Goblin Bombardment. Goblin Bombardment says, sacrifice a creature, this enchantment deals 1 damage to any target. So as you can imagine with Ocelot Pride, if Ocelot Pride makes tons of cats, then you just use Goblin Bombardment, flick them all at your opponent, and they die. It's a really efficient way to take advantage of all these extra bodies. Goblin Bombardment also allows you to basically instantly flip a Johnny. Your opponent plays a Johnny, their 2/1 cat enters, and then they sacrifice it to Goblin Bombardment, and it triggers a Johnny, and a Johnny gets to flip right away. The way that you stop this is if you have a removal spell for a Johnny, you want to use it while the 2/1 Cat Warrior trigger is on the stack. So your opponent casts a Johnny enters the battlefield. It triggers to put a 2/1 cat into play. With that trigger on the stack, you want to kill a Johnny so that your opponent doesn't have an opportunity to sacrifice the cat and flip a Johnny in response. That's your little window to kill a Johnny if your opponent has both a Johnny and Goblin Bombardment. Which again is like another little mini combo, right? So key points with energy: Flage, disgusting, especially the mini combo with Arena of Glory. But in general, you can imagine Flage is just disgusting. Guide of Souls, Ocelot Pride, very, very strong cards. And together, pretty unreasonable. They generate lots of energy and lots of life gain, and your energy player gets a really big board. Another little mini combo. And the last little mini combo is a Johnny plus Goblin Bombardment to super efficiently flip over a Johnny and take over the game with that Planeswalker. Overall, it's a strong aggro deck that is simply playing its cards and killing its opponent. You want to do the best you can to interact efficiently and effectively. Make sure you're breaking up these mini combos as best you can, but also not getting run down by, their little band of monkeys and cats and yeah, Boros Energy. Powerful deck doing powerful things. Nothing to, besides Flage's escape, nothing too, like, out of the ordinary. I guess Goblin Bombardment can be pretty complex to interact with sometimes, since, again, it's another game action that doesn't cost any mana. So you want to be really careful and mindful about, priority and timing when you're trying to interact with your opponent's creatures while they have a Goblin Bombardment on board. Now, I promise to be more efficient for the rest of this. Ruby Storm. Ruby Storm is a combo deck. It can kill you as early as turn 2. Turn 3 is a much more... I wouldn't necessarily say it's consistent, but it can definitely kill you on turn 3. It is enabled by Ral, Monsoon Mage, which makes instants and sorceries cost 1 less, and Ruby Medallion, which makes red spells cost 1 less. And so what it does is it tries to put one of these two in play on turn 2, and then it generates mana advantage by casting spells like Desperate Ritual, where now, for just 1 mana, I'm generating 3 red mana. And so one of the ways that they can kill you on turn 2 is on turn 2, first they cast Desperate Ritual. They have 3 mana in their mana pool. Then they cast Ral or Ruby and go down to 1 mana in their mana pool. Then they have a second copy of Desperate Ritual. So they use the 1 remaining mana, and now they have 3 mana in their mana pool. And now with 3 mana and either a Ral or a Ruby in play, things get pretty scary because Ren's Resolve and Reckless Impulse only cost 1 mana, so they can draw 2 cards for 1 mana. They have Pyretic Ritual and Desperate Ritual, and Strike It Rich, which has Flashback to create a treasure. And so you can see how they would be able to cast a ton of spells, generate a ton of mana, and efficiently churn through their deck as early as turn 2. How do they kill you? Good old Grape Shot. Grape Shot deals 1 damage to any target and has Storm. So they make a copy of it for every spell that's been cast this turn. And Storm includes both players' spells. So if you've interacted and cast a spell at any point, then that's going to count towards Storm as well. When you are playing against a Ruby Storm player, on important turns, it's important to keep track of storm count so that you know precisely how many copies of Grape Shot are going to go on the stack. And you also separately have to keep track of how many instants and sorceries were cast by your opponent. Because Ral, which can flip into a Planeswalker, he enters with an additional loyalty counter for each instant and sorcery spell that they've cast this turn. And so there is very high potential that your opponent flips Ral and can immediately ultimate him, which allows them to exile the top 8 cards of the library and cast them without paying their mana cost, which is really good. And again, they're potentially doing that as early as turn 2. Ral has this mechanism where they have to win a coin flip in order to flip him over. But they can decline to flip him even if they win the coin flip. So they're able to wait and only flip Ral after he has enough counters to ultimate if they so choose. And then they go through all these cards. There's one copy of Grape Shot in the main deck. Sometimes there's not even a copy in the main deck. They play the card Wish in order to go get Grape Shot from the sideboard. There's also the possibility to use Empty the Warrens instead of Grape Shot. I'm gonna be honest. I don't really know the situations where they use Empty the Warrens instead. I just know that it's a thing. And then they play Past in Flames, which gives each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard flashback until end of turn. Flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. So they cast a bazillion spells. They're making a bunch of mana. They finally, run out of gas from their draw spells. So they just cast Past in Flames and cast all their cards in the graveyard again. Draw a bunch more cards. Make a bunch more mana. It's a storm deck. It's chaotic. You are going to it's okay if you read your opponent's cards. It's okay to make them go one game action at a time. You're keeping track of instants and sorceries. They should be keeping track. And you're keeping track of storm count. And it's not a deck that once they start comboing off, it's guaranteed that they'll be able to kill you. And there are ways to interact. As you can imagine, graveyard hate so that Past in Flames doesn't enable your opponent to cast a bunch more spells can be quite good. So in Prowess, I'm going to play Tormod's Crypt so that when my opponent puts Past in Flames on the stack, I exile their entire graveyard, and now Past in Flames did nothing. So if your opponent is, running out of gas and counting on Past in Flames to gas them back up, Tormod's Crypt is going to shut down that option. Another thing that you can do, and this is pretty cool, is Storm is actually a triggered ability. So if Storm is 20 and your opponent casts Grape Shot, it doesn't instantly put 20 copies of Grape Shot on the stack. Grape Shot goes on the stack, and there's a Storm trigger that goes on the stack. And so Consign to Memory, which is a 1 mana blue instant that can counter a triggered ability, can counter Storm. And so your opponent just gets to deal 1 damage to one thing. Now, sometimes they have enough gas to go through and combo again. But those are two of the main ways to interact with the deck. And of course, the other way is to destroy a Ruby Medallion or counter Ruby Medallion. Consign to Memory can counter it. Kill Ral. And without their cost reducer, it's much, much harder for them to combo off, especially early on. And so, Storm is a deck where the key thing is when your opponent puts Ruby Medallion or Ral into play, you really, really, really want to be able to answer those. If they don't start immediately killing you trying to kill you on turn 2, if they, frequently it's a turn 3 kill deck, and so they'll go Ruby Pass or Ral Pass. And a lot of times, if you let them untap with Ruby or Ral, you will die. And so, if you have the ability to destroy Ruby or Ral before they untap and try to kill you, you should do it. If they're comboing off, make sure you're following along, making sure you're keeping track of all of the right things, and hope that you have Graveyard Hate to turn off Past in Flames, or a Consign to Memory to stuff their Storm Trigger, to potentially end the combo. Yeah, it's not a super fun deck to play against. It's one of the least exciting things about Modern, but I mean, as long as you know, like, kill Ral, kill Ruby, that's really the most important thing. Took me a long time to say that, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of how the deck works. Eldrazi Tron. So when it comes to Modern, you'll hear the term Tron quite a bit. So Tron references the 3 lands Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, and Urza's Tower. And assembling Tron is having these 3 lands in play at the same time. Because when you don't have all 3, then each of these lands just generates 1 colorless mana. No big deal. But if you have 1 mine, at least 1 mine, at least 1 power plant, and at least 1 tower, then mine and power plant produce 2 mana each. And Urza's Tower produces 3 mana. So if your opponent on turn 3 has the mine, the power plant, and the tower, they have 7 mana available on turn 3. Which, by the way, is precisely enough to cast Ugin, Eye of the Storms, which is a really scary card. Or maybe they cast Karn and head over to their wish board and use the last 3 mana to cast something like Trinisphere, Ensnaring Bridge, Torpor Orb, cards that just completely shut down a lot of strategies. Trinisphere and Ensnaring Bridge are an aggro player's worst enemy. Trinisphere making all spells cost 3, and Ensnaring Bridge generally stopping us from attacking. There's also Vexing Bauble over there in the sideboard that they can grab to shut down free spells. But Trinisphere does that as well by saying, that's nice that your spell is free, but actually you have to spend 3 mana on it. They also, let's say they have 2 copies of Urza's Tower and they get to 10 mana, they get to cast Ulamog. But generally it's a ramp deck. But instead of depending on something like Llanowar Elves, their lands are ramp. And they use Expedition Map to help them fetch for a specific colorless land that they need. And this Eldrazi Tron variant is also playing Eldrazi spells and Eldrazi lands. And so Eldrazi Temple generates 2 mana if you're casting Eldrazi spells. And so Thought-Knot Seer, for example, costs 4 mana. They can cast it on turn 2 if they go Temple. What else important is there to say? Kozilek's Command is a really, really, really powerful card. A pretty sick way to spend all that mana, and a way to generate more mana. All 4 modes on Kozilek's Command are very powerful. The thing to note is that this deck doesn't play a lot of interaction. They have a couple copies of Dismember. Otherwise, that's kind of it as far as killing creatures. So a lot of decks will try to race Tron and kill them before they can do something meaningful with all that mana, because once their engine is online, it's really hard to deal with. You can also destroy their lands. Blood Moon is a popular, or at least was once popular. You don't see it too much these days, but it is a powerful deck. The main combo is putting these 3 lands into play, and you hope to meaningfully, interact with their lands. Or this is where we go back and look at Consign to Memory, which I know is in Prowess's sideboard and many, many other sideboards. Counter target triggered ability or colorless spell for 1 blue mana, which means that's really nice that you got to 7 mana and you get to cast Ugin. But for 1 blue mana, I'm going to counter Ugin and then untap and kill you. This is far and away the most powerful answer for any deck to these Tron strategies that are casting these incredible, high-powered, high-costed colorless spells. And then Consign to Memory has Replicate. So if my opponent casts something like Ulamog, which has a cast trigger, then I can pay 2 mana and counter both Ulamog and Ulamog's trigger. So Consign to Memory is a very important and powerful way to interact with these Eldrazi and Tron decks. In addition to decks trying to meaningfully disrupt their land base. And yeah, I mean, I feel like that kind of covers it. Ramp into big dudes. Ramping it up. Interact with their ramp or counter their threats. Or, Ulamog is pretty tough because he exiles 2 permanents when you cast him, so he hits the board right away, right? Ugin as well can be pretty tough because when you cast him, your opponent get to exile a permanent, and then whenever you cast a colorless spell, they exile a permanent. So their creatures, Devourer of Destiny, also exile a permanent. So it's big giant thing that is also removal. It can be tough to erase this, but that is the game plan. And if they play Karn and go get, one of their hate pieces, then having artifact hate is generally pretty important. Or, I don't know, something like Boomerang Basics to just bounce it back to their hand and then kill them. Wink. In any case, ramp deck, big scary things, kill them fast, interact with their mana base, counter their threats. Eldrazi Tron. Jeskai Blink. Jeskai Blink plays Ragavan, plays Flage, plays Galvanic Discharge. So we've got some energy vibes, but it is very much like a combo mid-range deck, whereas energy is a aggro deck. So Jeskai Blink is playing Quantum Riddler. It's probably the premier Quantum Riddler deck. They have several ways to scam in Riddler so that even though they only spent 2 mana on it, they get to keep it in play. One of those ways is Felia. So a key play pattern to look out for against Jeskai Blink is turn 2, they'll just pass with their 2 mana up. And then on your end step, they'll flash in Felia. And then on their turn, they warp in Quantum Riddler, attack with Felia. Felia blinks out Quantum Riddler. And then when Quantum Riddler comes back, not only do they draw a card again, now this Quantum Riddler wasn't warped, and they just get to keep Quantum Riddler in play. This is pretty nasty. Now they've drawn 2 cards, and they have a 4/6 flyer in play. In addition to putting a 1/1 counter on Felia, so now it's a 3/3. This is bad news. You do not want this to happen. And so when your Blink opponent passes with 2 mana up on turn 2, you want to be very careful not to tap out there. If you have a Lightning Bolt or a Fatal Push or some kind of removal spell that can kill Felia after they flash it in, it's generally a pretty good idea to hold up that removal, and after they flash in Felia, kill Felia. Because if you let them flash in Felia and then untap, they can scam in Riddler, which you don't want to happen. I don't know how else to put it. Even if it's not scamming in Riddler specifically, Felia can generate value in several ways. Blinking your stuff, blinking other creatures of theirs. So definitely a line to look out for that has gotten me on several occasions before I finally learned my lesson, and now it's the first thing I'm telling you about when I talk about this deck. Other ways to scam in Quantum Riddler is Consign to Memory, which we were just talking about. It says counter triggered ability. Warp creates a delayed trigger. So when you warp in Quantum Riddler, on your end step, there's a trigger that sends Riddler to exile. So they can just consign that trigger, and now they get to keep their Quantum Riddler, which is a pretty good way to use Consign to Memory proactively. While also now this means that this super powerful sideboard card that's really important for a lot of matchups, now they get to just main deck it because they have a proactive mode on this card. Ephemerate to blink Riddler without Felia. They just blink him and they get to draw another card and keep him in play. So several ways to scam in Riddler. 4/6 is huge. If you remember, Unholy Heat deals 6 damage when Delirium is on. And so that's one of the reasons Unholy Heat is a popular and important card, because 6 damage is enough to kill both Flage and Quantum Riddler. So important card. 6/6s are really hard to interact with, especially since it can't die to Fatal Push. It's hard to efficiently interact with a scammed in Riddler. And then there's this horrible fella, Solitude, one of my most hated cards. Solitude is an evoke elemental. So while he typically costs 5 mana, instead of spending 5 mana, I can evoke him by exiling a white card from my hand. And so what I can do is I can say, okay, I'm going to cast Solitude. And instead of spending 5 mana, I'm just going to exile Felia from my hand. Felia is a white card, right? Flage is a white card. Teferi is a white card. So I'm going to exile a white card to flash in Solitude. Solitude enters the battlefield, exiles up to one other target creature. That creature's controller gains life equal to its power. So it's a free removal spell. And it's a free exile removal spell. It's not damage based. It's just an exile. So it's one of the cards that makes the Slick Shot combo quite hard to pull off. So we have a free removal spell entering the chat. Not ideal. And the story doesn't stop there, because your opponent could also potentially exile one of their own creatures in order to gain life. So maybe you're going for lethal and you think, all right, I got him. And, say you have a hexproof guy, or you're just going for a lethal with a burn spell or something. Like, you're like, okay, I've come up with a lethal, and even if they have a removal spell, they're still going to die. And then they exile their own guy, and you're like, oh, dang. Now they're not dead, and even after they exiled their own guy, they probably have enough resources to really claw back into this thing, or potentially kill me. And the other thing they can do, they can flash in Solitude for free, just exile a white card from their hand, and then cast Ephemerate. And just like Quantum Riddler, they've now scammed in a Solitude, except when Solitude re-enters, they get to exile another creature. And if we keep reading on Ephemerate has Rebound, which means on their next upkeep, they get to bounce Solitude again and exile another creature. So we have this little combo with Solitude and Ephemerate where now my opponent's not just exiling one creature. For one extra mana, they're now exiling three. And so we interact with that by, if we're smelling a Solitude in the air, we want to have mana available to kill Solitude in response to the Ephemerate. That's something we can also do with Quantum Riddler, but it's quite a bit harder because you really just need to have Delirium and Unholy Heat. But it is a thing. It happens. It's something you want to look out for. And so responding to Ephemerate to shut that down is very powerful. Consigned to Memory also works on Solitude if they want to just keep the 3/2 body in. It is a 3/2 with lifelink, mind you. So it is going to let them not just remove something, but gain some life along the way. So yeah, a lot of powerful interactions. Teferi is a really, truly horrible, no good card. It has very specific wording. Each opponent can cast spells only anytime they could cast a sorcery. So if you're coming from Standard, you're familiar with High Noon, which says, you can only play one spell per turn. And that's not relevant at all here. Voice of Victory is the card I was looking for. Voice of Victory says you can't cast spells on your opponent's turn, right? But Voice of Victory is a creature, so that's relatively easy to interact with. Teferi is a planeswalker, so he's much harder to interact with on average. And not only does Teferi say, you can't cast spells on my turn, because obviously you can't cast spells on your opponent's turn. Sorceries on your opponent's turn. It specifically says you can only cast spells anytime you can cast a sorcery. That means on your turn, you can't cast spells at instant speed. If your opponent casts a spell on your turn, you can't respond with an instant. The spell will resolve, and then once the stack is clear, you get to cast a spell. So it's very, very restrictive. You can't cast spells in combat. You can't, cast a spell after blocks. You have to do everything in main phase 1 and main phase 2 when the stack is clear. It's incredibly annoying. It effectively makes all of their spells not only uncounterable but unrespondable, and you can't do any kind of shenanigans where you hold priority. You can't do anything where you cast instants and sorcery instants after blocks to kind of efficiently win combat. It's a nightmare. I pretty much always kill Teferi. Unless I just really, really can't deal with him efficiently, or maybe my opponent's life total is in striking distance, and maybe I can kill them and ignore Teferi. But in general, he is a real bummer. My throat is going to give out soon. So yeah, kind of a mid-range combo deck, whereas Energy is an aggro combo deck. Watch out for Solitude. Watch out for the scams. Watch out for that turn 2 Felia to set up a Riddler scam. There's a lot of reasons that you want open mana in this matchup to stop your opponent from doing the broken things. And then, from there, without the mini synergies, their cards are a lot less powerful. But also, we talked about all this, they're a Flage deck too. They have Arena of Glory. It's like an Arena Flage deck, so you gotta play Graveyard Hate too. There's a lot of powerful things happening in this deck. The more you know, the more well equipped you are to deal with their various lines, the more prepared you are to kill them efficiently. All right. Affinity combo deck based around Kappa Cannoneer. Ooh, I'm really low on gas, guys. This might this video is probably gonna need a part 2. Um, yeah, I don't have the energy to talk about affinity right now. We're already over an hour. We can pretty efficiently knock Domain Zoo out of the list. So Domain Zoo is that aforementioned 5-color deck that is definitely in a lot of ways enabled by fetch lands. They are also an arena flage deck, and we see they have red, white, green, blue. They really are actively using every color except black. Some Domain Zoo, I think, use black. Here's one that is playing pest control in the sideboard. Like, in any case, the card here, the domain comes from Leyline of the Guild Pact. This card's pretty crazy. As with any Leyline, if it's in your opener, you start with it on the battlefield. All non-land permanents you control are all colors. And lands you control are every basic land type in addition to the other types. So, first of all, you start with Leyline in play. The simple thing is that now you have perfect mana, right? All your lands, fetch lands, basic lands, all of them have every land type. So, my mountain generates all 5 colors of mana. Everything generates all 5 colors of mana. Then you have the fact that each non-land permanent you control is all colors. So the key interaction here is that if you have Leyline, then Scion of Draco costs 2 mana instead of 10 mana because it costs 2 less for each basic land type among lands you control. And you have 5 basic land types among lands you control. So for 2 mana, you get a 4/4 flyer. And each creature you control has vigilance if it's white, hexproof if it's blue, lifelink if it's black, first strike if it's red, trample if it's green. And remember, our permanents are all colors. So it's not just a 2 mana 4/4, it's a 2 mana 4/4 with vigilance, hexproof, lifelink, first strike, and trample that gives all of your other creatures vigilance, hexproof, lifelink, first strike, trample. So the key the key interaction here is Leyline Scion. It's nuts. If they have Leyline, then Leyline Binding is also 1 mana, exile any non-land permanent. They do play a little bit of counter magic. Stubborn Denial is a card that you do want to have on your radar when you're trying to interact with them. I think I already said they're another Arena Flage deck, and then they get to play Doorkeeper Thrall in their 4 to 5 color deck. This is a way to scam in Flage. Creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger, so for just 3 mana, Flage is a 6/6. It doesn't deal 3 damage and gain 3 life when it enters, but more importantly, it doesn't get sacrificed. So it's a way for them to scam in Flage, as well as, potentially deny their opponents different ETB triggers. So Doorkeeper Thrall is something, it's almost like the Felia of the deck, where if you're playing a more fair game where they didn't cast Scion on turn 2, you do want to be mindful of them flashing in Doorkeeper Thrall on turn 2, and then playing Flage, and now you have to deal with a 6/6 Flage. on turn 3. But the big thing, the star of the show here is that Leyline Scion interaction. And so having something like Pick Your Poison, which doesn't target, because remember, Scion has hexproof, to force them to either sacrifice the Scion or sacrifice the Leyline, can be very powerful. Again, Boomerang Basics, kind of hot. You're just, alright, nice Leyline, bounce your Leyline. Um, the deck really, if they have Leyline in their opener, especially like if they have Leyline in their opener, the deck is really really good. All their cards are really powerful, and it's a scary deck. If they have Leyline Scion, it's like insane. You're like, you're in for it, depending on what kind of deck you're playing. The big weak point of the deck is that without Leyline, it's like fine, but really it's got a bad mana base. It's a slow, convoluted mana base, with some decent cards. You do need to keep track of domain if they don't have Leyline, so you know how much Leyline binding costs. How much Scion costs. Flage is still a really powerful card, so you want to be aware of that. Kavu is a 5/5 if they have domain. So again, like 2 mana 5/5 with, as you can see, a bunch of other text on it. Really, really good if they have Leyline in play. If they don't have Leyline, then getting Kavu to a scary size takes work. Um, so, you know, basically, if your Zoo opponent starts with Leyline in play, um, you're pretty nervous. You're in for a really tough fight. If you're playing again, our favorite Consign to Memory, using Consign to counter Sign of Draco is, possibly your only hope to win this game if you don't have a way to interact with Leyline, or somehow force them to sacrifice Scion. So you do want, either Enchantment Hate or, like I said, Boomerang Basics kind of card where you can bounce a non-land permanent. Leyline Binding can exile Leyline of the Guild Pack. It's kind of flavorful. Leyline Binding can hit Leylines. Never really thought about that. Anyway, Stubborn Denial is a card to look out for when you're like using this key piece of interaction. You don't want it to get countered, which means you need to have an extra mana or potentially deal with their 4-power things before you interact. But Leyline is definitely the thing that makes this deck go burr. So you want to interact with Leyline if you can, counter Scion if you can't interact with Leyline, or maybe just counter Scion anyway if you can. Don't get blown out by Doorkeeper Thrall scamming in Flage. And, of course, the Arena can be used on Flage on turn 3 if they have Doorkeeper Thrall. So you're potentially got a Hasty Flage coming at you on turn 3, which is pretty scary. There's definitely a sub-theme emerging here where, you know, even the decks that aren't combo decks all have these really powerful 1-2 punches packed into them. Like, Modern is filled with powerful cards and strong synergies, but then there's also just these like, whew, these real heavy hitters packed in every deck that you want to, make sure you're aware of, and as best you can, putting yourself in a position to not get blown out by them. You don't want to get too over-indexed setting up your own thing, and then you leave yourself completely exposed to your opponent's broken mini combo when you didn't have to. It's Modern, so you have broken mini combos as well, but it's important to acknowledge who has the better broken mini combo. Like, do I want to play Cutter Bobble, on turn 2 every game? Yeah, yeah, I do. Am I playing Cutter Bobble on turn 2 every time I have it? Not quite. Almost always, because these turn 3 combos are not things that are winning the game outright. So, if I'm counting on a counter spell to be my interaction for my opponent's mini combo, then yeah, I gotta hold out. Or, if I can't beat a scammed in Riddler, then maybe I gotta hold out. Um, you know, this video, as I talk about the powerful things every deck is doing and the ways that you don't want to get blown out, um, it can probably come across intimidating, as I think about the perspective of someone trying to, you know, dip their toes into modern. But just remember, on the other side of all these powerful interactions and broken mini combos, um, you have your own powerful modern deck that you are using to, one, meaningfully interact with these combos that you know about and are ready for, and two, present your own very dangerous lines and synergies and mini combos that your opponent needs to either answer or die to as well. Um, it's very high powered. It's very, you and your opponent aren't like, you know poking each other with sticks. You guys are hitting each other with baseball bats or something. I don't know. This gotten weirdly violent, which I don't like. Um, but as I wrap up part one, and there'll be a part two, I just want to end on, yes, I'm talking about all the different very powerful things that the decks that you'll face are doing. Um, but just remember that your deck does something very powerful too. And by playing chess with your opponent and being really aware and respectful of what's happening on their side of the table, in addition to the game plan that you're progressing, you put yourself in a really good position to win. Um, it's a balance. You're doing something powerful. Your opponent's doing something powerful. You're progressing your game plan forward where you can, and making sure not to expose yourself to anything too broken along the way as you can. Um, so yeah, I hope that was helpful. I'm tired. End of part one. Have a like, subscribe, check out my Metafy. I'm really excited for Modern Season. I'm gonna be doing some serious deck techs for my version of Prowess, which is a pretty disgustingly cool deck. And I do coaching. You know, Modern is really cool. There's a steep learning curve, um, but it's a curve worth climbing. This is a cool format. It's very fun. Um, Again, don't be intimidated by all the powerful things that your opponents are doing and that all these decks do, because you're going to be doing powerful things too, um, and that's really really fun. All right, see you next time. Thanks, guys.